Lighthouse family, I hope you're well. We continue to pray for you and trust that amidst difficult times, you are drawing closer to the Lord. Let me start by asking you this question. As you look at all that is going on, is God being faithful? A worldwide pandemic, deaths in the thousands, record unemployment, a precarious stock market, confinement to our homes. Do you feel like God is being faithful? We're finishing our week-long focus on the character of God, each day looking at another attribute, and today we look at God's faithfulness. Faithfulness is the idea that God will always be true to his character, his promises, and his people. Now, in theory, none of us would doubt God's faithfulness. Of course he is faithful. Lamentations 3:22 and 23, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Hebrews 10:23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. But again, in the middle of what is happening, do you feel like God is being faithful? Or to make it more personal, when you think of how God can be faithful to you during the coronavirus, what comes to mind? What do you pray for? Maybe it's physical protection for you and those that you care about. Maybe it's financial well-being. Maybe it's occupational security. Maybe it's relational harmony. If all of this is what it means for God to be faithful, then we must wrestle with the issue, what if those things don't happen? It's a logical question, isn't it? If physical protection demonstrates God's faithfulness, then sickness seems to demonstrate that he isn't faithful. If keeping your job is God's faithfulness, what does it mean if you lose it? To answer this, to find the answer, we need to consider this. Is God's faithfulness reactive, or is his faithfulness ordaining? Reactive faithfulness means something happens and God steps in to protect or rescue in some way. Someone who is sick crosses paths with you, but God steps in and protects you. Or you get sick and God heals you. Your company makes cuts, but you keep your job. Now, these are examples of God's faithfulness, but the picture in our minds is that of God reacting to the world and bringing about better circumstances. Ordaining faithfulness means that God's faithfulness is seen in the bigger plan that he has ordained. He isn't reacting to the coronavirus. The coronavirus is part of his greater, if very mysterious plan. Meaning that faithfulness is not simply seen in protection and rescue. He has a much bigger and a much better plan for all this going on. To illustrate it, think of the superhero movies that so many people love. Not me, of course, I'm way too godly for that, but imagine, hypothetically, I've seen every Marvel movie. The heroes themselves are reactive. They're responding to some negative situation and trying to save the day. Right? There are bad guys or some hidden weapon or some aliens will visit Earth, and the superheroes must respond. People hope in them because they have power, but there's the understanding that they can't do everything. They can't save everyone. This is often how we see God, reactive. Oh no, COVID-19 has entered our world. God, react and protect our health. God, react and heal our bodies. God, react and watch over our jobs and our finances. So he's like a superhero. But again, our God's faithfulness is not reactive, it is ordaining, meaning that in our illustration, he's not the superhero of the story, he's the screenwriter. He's bigger than the story because he's the author of the story, orchestrating each event according to his plan. So when the villains come onto the scene, the author doesn't quickly react by sending the heroes to save the day. It was all part of the story that he is writing. As we look at Scripture, we see that God is faithful because he protects and rescues. That is his grace. But it's not reactive, it is ordained. Think of the story of Joseph. On one hand, we picture God being reactive. Joseph's brothers hate him, but God protects him and doesn't let them kill him. He is thrown into prison, but God rescues him. There is a famine, but God provides relief. So you might see God's faithfulness as reactive. There are bad circumstances, so he steps in to protect and rescue. But is this how Joseph understood it? And really, is this how Scripture teaches it? Well, near the end of the story, we have Joseph's famous words to his brothers, the ones who seemingly initiated a lifetime of difficulty and suffering by nearly killing him and selling him off into slavery. And this is what it says in Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. It's this beautiful picture of God bringing about the salvation of not just a family, but really a nation and ultimately humanity, because through this family would come the Christ. But the word I want us to notice is the word meant. Joseph doesn't say, you meant evil against me, but God turned it into good, like lemons into lemonade. That would be the reactive superhero. No, the brothers meant it for evil. That was their plan. But from the beginning, God meant all that was happening to save Joseph's family, the nation of Israel, and ultimately the line of Jesus. Every struggle and every suffering had a purpose. As we've often talked about, nothing is wasted in God's economy. Getting back to our previous illustration, it means that God is not a hero in our story, but he's the author of his story. As we think about what this means practically, we must embrace the truth that often we can't see and understand the bigger story that God is writing. And so his faithfulness is often clouded in the struggles and sufferings that we are enduring. But we must believe that we're just getting a snapshot of what is really happening. It's like this devotional that I'm giving. More than one person commented upon seeing this backdrop during Sunday's sermon that they like the house. But this is actually just a little section of our house, and the only part of our house that looks like this. Most of the rest is painted beige. It may look like I've memorized this devotional, but I'm actually reading off a teleprompter that me and one of my sons made. You see this, but I'm actually wearing basketball shorts. So you see part of the picture, but not the whole thing. In the same way, God's bigger story is often hidden from us. But the encouraging truth is that we don't have to hope that God will be faithful by reacting to the challenges of life. But they are all part of his loving and wise plan for us. As Joseph said, God meant it for good. Let's step back then and consider our understanding of God's faithfulness during the pandemic of 2020. If God protects your health and your job and your finances, that is his faithfulness. He is good and kind and loving. But if you lose your job or get sick, if finances become tight, or if an important event gets canceled, that is also God's faithfulness. Because his faithfulness is not reactive, it is part of a greater story, meaning that everything is part of his wise plan, and everything is part of his loving purpose. You may not know the full story now, but you can rest knowing that God is faithful. And so your life is in the hands of the great screenwriter who has written a story that not only pursues his greatest glory, but your greatest good.